Breaking news from San Diego, California. The police department announcing moments ago that a pro-Trump demonstration has been declared an unlawful assembly due to acts of violence. Police are now demanding those in attendance to clear the area and head away from the scene. Police are making it clear that those who remain or return to the scene could be cited or even arrested and risk exposure to chemical agents and other less lethal forces. We'll keep an eye out for developments and bring them to you. Anyone who was surprised by Wednesday's attack on Capitol Hill was not listening to the months of warnings from law enforcement officials about a rise in American extremism. The Department of Homeland Security warned us in October that homegrown radicals and terrorists are the most persistent and lethal threat. 2019 was the deadliest year for domestic terrorism since 1995, when the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City was blown up by an American radical. 168 people, including babies, murdered because one man bought into lies about the government. In 2020, storming state capitol buildings became somewhat of a norm for right-wing extremist groups, leading the Anti-Defamation League to call this week's riot inevitable. And in case you didn't know, as that mob stormed America's Capitol Wednesday, pro-Trump groups surrounded at least 11 state capitol buildings. Joining me to talk about this rising threat, Malcolm Nance, MSNBC terrorism analyst, and Naveed Jamali, author of How to Catch a Russian Spy. Malcolm, President-elect Biden has described the pro-Trump mob as domestic terrorists. Take a listen.
Don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists.
Malcolm, what is the FBI's criteria for domestic terrorism?
Well, interestingly enough, there is no criteria for domestic terrorism in the United States because there are no domestic terrorism laws on the book. There is a definition of terrorism that the FBI uses, which is a act of violence or threat of violence, political in nature, in which the an audience to be influenced is beyond the immediate victims, but that generally involves terrorist acts which involve terrorist tactics. As distasteful as it might seem, civil unrest and civil protest is not terrorism. So Joe Biden was using that phrase rhetorically. But if he would like there to be terrorism laws that people can be charged under, the Congress will have to make that one of their first acts.
Malcolm, give me a sense of how these groups are radicalized.
Well, if you would like a really easy definition of radicalization for these American insurgents or insurrectionists, all you have to do is look at the terrorist group ISIS. ISIS was actually a offshoot of Al-Qaeda, the younger, faster version that was more radical because they radicalized in an independent method of the way the old OGs from Al-Qaeda did. They radicalized through watching video, communicating with each other, and broadening their cult-like view of Islam through the internet. And what we're seeing with these new American insurrectionists, the Boogaloo Boys, Proud Boys, the average, rabid Trump voter, is they are self-radicalizing on the internet in the exact same method. There are so many similarities. I mean, I could stand here for an hour and compare the two things here, but they are very, very similar in the way that they become extremist and how they progress from political radicals to bomb-throwing terrorists. At some point, we're going to get to that.
Naveed, there are many people, including you, including Malcolm, who have been ringing the alarm on this for months. Was the American government listening? Were they prepared? And where do they go from here?
No, they weren't listening. I mean, in the intro, you showed the Oklahoma City bombing. I was shocked to learn that the militia that tried to kidnap the governor of Michigan was also the same militia 20 years ago where Timothy McVeigh spent time with. That militia was not only not disassembled, it was allowed to continue on and to potentially plot a kidnapping of a governor. You know, this is crazy. When you show the grid picture of the 4 cities where this was not only happening in D.C., this was happening simultaneously across the country. As Malcolm would say, that's a clue. This is clearly cells. This is clearly something larger than just the people who are swarming the capitals. This is a level of command and control and leadership. And when you do that, I mean, there's chatter. I mean, this is Malcolm's world. I mean, they're talking, and that the federal government would not know that there was talk, that there was chatter. It's either one of 2 things. One is they're so incompetent that they're incapable of doing their job, or secondly, it's that they don't prioritize this threat. And I got to tell you, Alicia, like if Timothy McVeigh could go to a militia in Michigan before he went out and carried out the worst domestic terrorist attack on American soil before 9/11, and that militia group was allowed to not only stay around but prosper to the point where it would then try to plot another terrorist act. I mean, to me, that just tells you how law enforcement looks at this stuff. And I got to say, as a brown man, you know, I got to, if these were Muslim groups, if these were, you know, Islamists, this would not be allowed to happen. This would be treated very, very differently. And post 9/11, we've done a fantastic job of making sure never again that there will be a 9/11. But apparently, that doesn't matter to white extremists.
Alicia,
Malcolm,
let me jump in real quick.
Yeah, no, jump in, but also, Malcolm, make sure you talk to me about the inauguration and how that is looming on the horizon.
Right.
Go ahead.
It's funny you should mention that because I wanted to get to that, but I have to bring something up first. When we were monitoring all the communications and chat rooms and Telegram networks and Parler threads on this since October, and that's when I started I have a new book coming out about the Trump insurgency that has just inaugurated itself. We were watching how these people were organizing and what activities they were doing. You know, in the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, the plan B for that plot in the U.S. Attorney's indictment is that they were going to get 200 armed men, storm the state capitol in Michigan, let out all the Republicans and law enforcement, and then start summarily executing all of the Democrats. That should have been the baseline for any protest within a mile of the U.S. Capitol. Now, we're going into this new inauguration. Capitol Hill police utterly failed because they viewed these protesters as allied and like them, which means that they were Trump voters and white. Somebody in there thought they would not be malicious. Those people were hell-bent for murder. They had a gallows outside. They had what could only arguably be called people who were planning murder cells or capture and kill teams that were going in there using violent fervor. This inauguration, anybody who is listening to me right now who is in the United States government in security for this inauguration, hear what I have to say. There needs to be a national security exclusion zone, starting at K Street, going all the way to 2nd Street Northeast, going all the way south down to the riverfront. Every bridge into the city from the west needs to be closed, and nothing human moves inside that sector except the president of the United States en route to the White House. That is the only way we're going to guarantee that there's not going to be a sniper attack, or some guy decides that he wants to be a human bomb, or somebody decides that they're just going to stand up there and protest and embarrass spoil the whole thing and storm barricades. Let's just shut the city down, get this over with, and move on with the business of securing the nation to stop COVID.
Malcolm and Naveed, thank you. Thank you both.